سيدنا محمد سيد الأولين والآخرين وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين ورضي الله عن أصحابه وأزواجه وأحبابه وأتباعه أجمعين وعنا معهم برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. أما بعد فالسلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. First of all, I'd like to thank and acknowledge our dear beloved Professor Nizami. Me and him, I'm just saying me and him, just trying to sort of be close to him, though he's much more senior in knowledge and in many other things that I don't have. But you know, they always say, the old Sufi poet used to say, "In lam takunu mithlahum fatashabbahu, inna at-tashabbuha bil kirami falahu." If you're not like them, try to emulate them. For emulating those who are good will rub off on you. We've been talking on the phone back and forth, me and the professor, since I've come to know about the visit to this prestigious place, let me say. So it's an honor, it's a great privilege for me to be amongst you here today. And obviously I'm also thankful to the Department of State who facilitated the visit to build bridges and reach out to people throughout the world. I think it's a great initiative, and obviously I'm personally also honored and thankful to the effort that has been put. Before I start, I know I was requested to speak about Islam in America, and I think I am qualified to speak about that, not because of knowledge necessarily, but I've spent most of my life in the United States. And I was, as you all know, born and raised in Syria, so I can sort of link both worlds together. But before I go there, I want to just mention the professor in his introduction has really summed up everything I've been I've made my mission for the past 30 years on the behest of my elders and senior shuyukh and scholars. Number one, correct information. You know, being in a university, there's something called academic honesty. And academic honesty demands that you don't just provide your information, but you provide full disclosure. Correct information is key, my dear beloved, especially in Islam. Number two, back to basics. What are the basics? If you're a Muslim, there are only two things that are basics for you. The book that was revealed by the Creator onto His Messenger, and the Sunnah of His Messenger. Everybody else we love. We love the work of all the scholars. We appreciate them and we adore them and we pray for them, but we go back to the fountain. You will find always that the book and the Sunnah are very merciful, very inclusive, very forgiving. People tend not to be as forgiving and as merciful and as inclusive. We tend to be exclusive. And the Creator and the Prophet ﷺ teaches you to be inclusive. And I think that's very important. I think he mentioned the third thing, and I will stop with that. I could actually talk off of his talk, and that's the benefit of juniors coming after seniors. They can just, off of whatever they say, we can just pick up and keep going. But the last thing he says, Al-Khuluqul Hasan. Yes, salam. Good characters. A good Muslim is a good human being in the first place. If you're not a good human being, you can't be a good Muslim. It's impossible. You see, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Creator of all, willed to describe His Prophet, the masterpiece of the creation, sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam, He didn't say, وَإِنَّكَ لَعَلَىٰ عِلْمٍ عَظِيمٍ. We have given you lots of knowledge. He did, but He didn't say that. He didn't say, وَإِنَّكَ لَعَلَىٰ كرم عظيم only. He didn't say وإنك لعلى مال عظيم. We have given you lots of money. He said to him, as you know the Quran, the verse in the Quran says وإنك يعني يا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وإنك لعلى خلق عظيم. You have the highest level of ethics and character. That's a message. All right, so enough with sort of me picking after the professor here. Let's talk about Islam in America real quick. And with this, I would like you, I asked the professor if I could, because you see, I'll give you a preview, obviously, as much as I can. Talking about Islam in America requires days, actually, because it's very interesting. It's complex in a sense to try to sort of talk about every aspect in half an hour. But I want to talk about few main things, and I'd like to encourage all of you to ask questions afterwards. And you know, again, open questions. I don't believe in any censorship, so go ahead and ask whatever you like, and I'll try to answer to the best of my knowledge. Now, I do not know everything, and I will not be shy to tell you about anything, whether dunya information or dunyawi information or dini information that I do not know. I don't have a problem saying I do not know, and I will tell you that if I don't. But if I do, I'll give you the best answer that I have. From there, let's talk about, obviously, Islam in the United States. Islam is the third largest faith in the United States after Christianity and Judaism. It is estimated that Muslims constitute 1% of the entire U.S. population, putting them at about 3.2, 3.5 million Muslims. But within the American Muslim community, we estimate 5 to 7. And I don't have official numbers. Remember, because the United States does not really classify people based on faith. The U.S., as you all know, we have a strict church and state separation policy. Hence, you're a citizen. It doesn't matter what you believe in, and the government doesn't really care necessarily about what you believe. You may believe whatever you want as long as you're a law-abiding citizen. One thing about the American Muslim community is it's the most diverse section of American society. The most diverse. Why? Because we have Muslims in America that come from practically every single part of this universe. Southeast Asians, now talking about, you know, India, Pakistan, obviously, Bangladesh. We're talking about Malaysia, we're talking about Indonesia, Europe, European Muslims, sure. We have the Balkans, right? You have Bosnia, Albania, Kosovo, some ex-Soviet republics, Russia, you know, and it's nowadays, I guess, the Russian Federation, and other, obviously, as well within Europe. You have, and those are ethnic Europeans. Then we have, obviously, Middle Easterns, Arabs. We have a whole segment of Chinese Muslims, as you all know also. I mean, you're close here to them. To me, it's close. Sorry. I mean, don't mind my geographical ignorance in a bit. But we have Chinese Muslims, again, ethnic Chinese Muslims. You have now a growing segment within the, obviously we have African, sure, I mean, Islam was in Africa early on, as you all know, so we have African Muslims, and we have 1/4 of the American Muslim population is actually African American revert. They reverted back to Islam, and that's about 25% of the American Muslim community. We also obviously have now a growing segment within the Latin community. As you all know, in the United States, we're North America. South America is just our next door neighbor. And we have a growing segment of Latins who are taking Islam or choosing Islam as their faith. From Mexico down all the way to Argentina, to Colombia, to Brazil, obviously to Chile, etc., etc., etc. So it's very exciting in a sense. Some of you may also, I mean, I know you were sitting here, and Mark and I were looking at this and saying this is such a beautiful place to look at. I mean, it's a poster almost. You know, I was thinking maybe I should turn like this and take a picture this way, and you know, maybe we'll do it with the professor so it can have more barakah. But we do have something similar to this, not maybe as exotic in being ancient and all that, but we have big centers with minarets and domes in the United States. One of them is the Islamic Center in Washington, D.C., and it's a huge place. It's got a big minaret and all that, and it can hold about maybe a few thousand people, and this was opened in 1957. And we have mosques like this across the states. So you will not, surely most mosques in the United States do not have minarets and domes, and it's purely because of financials. Nothing else. I mean, again, these things cost money, obviously, and as you know, since the U.S., we have a strict separation. In other words, government doesn't help any religion per se. You're on your own. You do whatever you want to do or whatever you can do. And the Muslim community went to just establishing centers. You won't find minarets and domes, but you will still find plenty and domes, at least one in every city, in every major city in the United States. The history of Muslims in the U.S., so we're talking about 5 million Muslims, or 5 million Americans who identify with Islam as their faith. But Islam has started really early on in America. It dates back to 1528. That's one of the earliest accounts. So we're 1528. A Moroccan slave named Estevanico, called by his Spanish masters, whose ship was wrecked near present-day Galveston, Texas. He and 4 survivors subsequently traveled through much of the American Southwest, etc., etc. Also, I mean, so I don't know how, I probably don't want to go. I've put a lot of data here about early Muslims, and we start back from the 15th century, 16th century, 17th century, etc., etc. Even through the American Revolution and thereafter, those of you who are familiar with the American Revolution, and Muslims were part of that. Also, the very first country in the world to recognize the United States as an independent nation was a Muslim country, was Morocco. That's the first country to recognize the United States, and that's in the year 1777. In fact, there's I had put a picture. I thought there was going to be a projector, but maybe some other time, of letters exchanged between George Washington, President of the United States, and between the King of Morocco at that time, Mohammed bin Abdullah, in 1777. And we also in the U.S., again, presidents, you probably have heard lately about President George Bush reestablished that again, if I'm not mistaken, George W. meaning, the iftar in Ramadan, during the month of Ramadan, and iftar at the White House. But it's not really President, again, I may be mistaken if President George Bush restarted that. But it goes back all the way to in December 9th, 1805, where President Thomas Jefferson hosted the first iftar at the White House for his guest Suleiman Milimeli. He's a ambassador of Tunisia at that time to the United States. And from that time on, it seems like it began to be sort of a habit. And until now, I think even President Obama obviously did that, and before as well. In the 19th century, again, and there's an incident here I found on April 4th, 1865, and that's near the end of the American Civil War. Union troops commanded by Colonel Johnston set ablaze the University of Alabama. That's my next door state. I'm from Georgia, and so that's not. A copy of the Quran was known as the Quran, was saved by one of the university staff. And what happened was the highest rank, well, What happened was actually these soldiers came and they wanted to set ablaze the whole university. So the librarian of the university went and told them, look, we have lots of good books here. Can you please save them? The field commander said, I have to write to my senior officer in Tuscaloosa, if I'm not mistaken. So he wrote to the senior officer, can we save the library? We can destroy everything, but can we save the library? He said, you can't. So the field officer got the message that you can't save anything. But you know what he said? He told the librarian, you can only save one book. And you know what the only book that was saved from burning, that was the Quran. In there. We have also, obviously, I mean, we have Muslims came to the United States also before that, also through slavery. Right? During the time of slavery, obviously, as you probably know, some of the slaves brought to colonial America from Africa were Muslims. By 1800, some 500,000 Africans arrived in what became the United States. Historians estimate that between 15 to 30% of all enslaved African men and less than 15% of the enslaved African women were Muslims. And that sort of tells you why some of them are reverting, in a sense. They're saying, wait a minute, we were kidnapped from the West African coast, and most of these people were Muslims, or some of them in some occasions. So they're saying we want to go back to our ancestors and what our ancestral faith was, and that's why you see the highest percentage of people converting to Islam in the United States, obviously, is in the African American community. And that's sort of due to that kind of historical context. As far as America, obviously, you know the whole thing about the religious freedom. American views of Islam affected debates regarding freedom of religion during the drafting of the state constitution of Pennsylvania in 1776. Constitutionalists promoted religious tolerance, while anti-constitutionalists called for reliance on Protestant values in the formation of the state Republican government. Obviously, the former group won out and inserted a clause for religious liberty in the new state constitution. That became very how do I say, a very precious American value, being free to practice your faith, regardless what your faith is. In fact, in 1797, President John Adams signed the Treaty of Tripoli, and in the Treaty of Tripoli, he declared that the United States had, and I quote, no character of enmity against the laws, religion, or tranquility of Muslims. And at that time in the treaty it's called Muslimin, really like Muslimin. So instead of saying Muslims, you just wrote it in the Arabic in a sense. So that he says in 1797, President Adams says that the United States has no character of enmity against the laws, religion, or tranquility of Muslims, and that's in Article 11. There's also things like that through President Franklin and President Jefferson as well. President Jefferson defended religious freedom in America, including those of Muslims, and at that time they called them Mohammedans with a T, not Mohammedans. They called them Mohammedans. All right. As far as modern Muslims, small scales, or modern Muslims in America in a sense, small scale of migration to the U.S. by Muslims began in 1840 with the arrival of especially two kinds of, in a sense, population from the Middle East, Yemenis from Yemen and Turks. And that lasted up until World War I. And again, when some historians say Turks, at that time, remember, the Ottoman Empire was everywhere. So anyone who came from the Ottoman Empire, in a sense, especially was from that region, was a Turk, and Allah knows best. But most of these immigrants, especially from Arab areas or the Ottoman Empire, came with the purpose of financial. So they want to make some money and go back to their homeland. However, economic hardships of the 19th century America prevented them from prospering. And as a result, the immigrants settled in the United States permanently. Lots of people, especially still nowadays. I mean, as you probably know, more than half of the American Muslim population comes from India and Pakistan in general. I mean, the subcontinent, we call it. And when I talk to friends of mine and people who have been there 30, 40 years in the US, what happened? He says, well, I came for 5 years to finish my degree and I wanted to go back to India, but 40 years down the line, I'm still here. Most of them are like that. Everybody came for, let me finish my school, let me get some money, 5, 6, 7 years, and I'll go back. 40 years down the line, they're still there. We obviously have also a huge population of American Muslims settled in Dearborn, Michigan. You probably heard about Michigan. Dearborn, Michigan has one of the highest until today. In fact, when you drive through Dearborn, I always say, sometimes I don't know, where am I? Am I in America or is it? But it is America. It's just a different flavor, and that's what makes the American social fabric even more beautiful. Quincy, Massachusetts. You'll also find lots of Lebanese, Syrians that came also as well. Ross, North Dakota. In fact, Ross, North Dakota, that was the site of the first documented masjid or mosque and Muslim cemetery in the United States. And they re-established that mosque again in 2005. In 1906, Bosnians, out of all people, obviously you wouldn't think, I mean, that time Bosnia was still okay. Bosnians settled in Chicago, Illinois, the Windy City, out of all places. And in that city and in bordering Wisconsin, still the Bosnians have a large presence, and an old presence, in fact. In 1907, Lipka Tatars who lived in Poland. So they were Polish, but ethnically they're Tatar Polish. And those guys also, they founded the first Muslim organization in New York City, Polish Muslim organization. And that was called the American Mohammedan Society. In 1915, we have the first American mosque that was founded in New York by Albanian Muslims. And then in Bedford, Maine as well. So I don't want to go further and further. There's a lot of stuff like that. We also have Chinese Muslims known as the Hui, H-U-I, who have migrated to the United States. And something a bit interesting about Chinese Muslims that came and immigrated to the U.S., they remained within the Chinese community. They didn't really sort of, you'll see like Arabs who have, Americans who have of Arab descent or Americans who are of Indian descent, they're merging together in a sense, and all this. Chinese remain sort of with the Chinese. And I'll tell you a personal story. I took my son to sign him up at a Kung Fu school in Georgia, right? So I looked for the most authentic Kung Fu, like real Chinese. And I found one, and this Chinese Kung Fu master and all this, and names I couldn't read obviously, and they sounded really good. I took him there and we met with the Kung Fu master, and all of a sudden his like first assistant, another black belt Kung Fu, Chinese, came and all this thing, and he said, my name is Muhammad. I said, no, that's my name. He says, no, that's my name. I said, come on, you're Chinese. He says, yeah, so? So again, due to he just caught me off guard. That's all. I mean, everything was Chinese. Everybody was Chinese, and this guy comes and he's Chinese and he's Kung Fu player and he's telling me his name is Muhammad. I said, okay, great. Now can I put my son with you? All right. So they migrated to the U.S. and they remained with the Chinese society. I mean, with the Chinese immigrants mostly, and. We have actually, especially in Santa Barbara, California, and in other places in California, also people who were descendant of the Mughal Empire, as you know, especially in the early 20th century. Some of the descendants of the Mughal Emperor Bahadur Shah actually moved and immigrated permanently to the United States. So there you go. As far as the cities, let me just go through some of the cities. Obviously, we think that the largest city in the US that has the largest number of Muslims is New York City, the Big Apple, followed by Dearborn, Michigan, and then obviously Los Angeles, California, Patterson, New York, as well. My city in Georgia is not there, but anyway. Mosques, the numbers in mosques in the United States in 2011 was about 2,100 mosques throughout the U.S. And that's probably a conservative number. I can tell you in my own city where I live, obviously I live in Atlanta, the suburbs of Atlanta, but Atlanta itself has an excess of 100 mosques. That's one city, one major city in the U.S. And remember, we have 50 states. So again, the numbers say about 2,100, and I would say a bit more than that. As far as integration, obviously you'll see Muslims throughout the wider American society, from obviously medicine, as you all know, the subcontinent. Americans who are of subcontinent descent, or India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, I just call them subcontinent, just it makes it easier, basically constitute the second largest, the first largest, not the second, the first largest international medical graduates practicing in the United States. So your chance of going to the US and getting treatment, medical treatment, on the hands of a physician that comes from an Indian background is more likely than not. And remember, when I went to med school, at least 1/3 of my class was Indian American, meaning, but still, I mean, you know, so talking about that. Syrians happen to be the second largest number of physicians practicing in the United States after Indians, of foreign medical backgrounds anyway. But you'll see them everywhere. You'll see them in medicine, you'll see them in journalism, less in journalism, we need them much more in journalism, obviously. But you'll see them in government, you'll see them in law enforcement, you'll see them in the military. In fact, in 1996, the U.S. Navy appointed its first Muslim chaplain, and you'll have Muslim chaplains throughout the military for all the armed forces, the Army, the Navy, and obviously the Air Force, etc., etc. We have let me just tell you about some of the organizations. We have some Muslim organizations that deal with Islamic stuff and holding conferences and Islamic activities. We have Muslim organizations that deal with political stuff. So they try to sort of be involved in politics and all that, and they have an Islamic background. We have also Muslim organizations that deal with charity. You probably also heard of Islamic Relief. Islamic Relief is famous, and it's everywhere as well. We have couple of museums, Muslim museums in America, and we have one think tank. Now, let me finish by saying, obviously, American Muslim life after September 11. As you know, September 11, the terrorist attacks were difficult on all of us, obviously, but American Muslims obviously felt that they were, in a sense, disadvantaged or victimized, in a sense, by, number one, associating Islam with violence, and that was a problem in a sense. That grew. Surely there was an increased number of hate crimes committed against people who were perceived to be Muslims post 9/11. So when I say there are some hate crimes registered, I'm talking about throughout the United States, about 20 in that year. So again, we don't want to. So you have an accurate idea of how things are. Obviously, look, some of these things, unfortunately, because we don't want anyone. I remember in Texas, they pulled some guy who was a Sikh, because they wear turban, mistaken him for a Muslim, and the guy was abused and beaten and all that. Again, that should not really. These things are there. Let me just go through some of these things. Obviously, on small occasions, also Muslim women who wear the distinctive hijab, were harassed, causing some Muslim women to either stay home or temporarily abandon that practice as well. We have that unfortunately happening. Extremism also in the United States. We have at least one American, not of recent immigrant background. You probably heard of the name John Walker Lynn, has been imprisoned, convicted on charges of working with the Taliban and carrying weapons against American soldiers. He had converted to Islam while in the United States, moved to Yemen, studied Arabic, then to Pakistan, and then he was recruited by the Taliban. We have another American also, not of recent immigrant descent, so I'm not bringing just recent immigrant descent as well, who was implicated in terrorism, Jose Padilla, if you also remember, of Puerto Rican descent, and was plotting allegedly the dirty bomb. He was also detained and eventually convicted. So you'll have these things nowadays also with the rising crisis of ISIS, or the ISIS crisis, as I call it sometimes. You'll have also, unfortunately, increased Islamophobia. In general, it has increased. Now, in general, having said that, it makes it sure American Muslim community finds itself under pressure in a sense because of rising Islamophobia. At the same time, they feel absolutely horrible about the violence that happens in the name of Islam, just like the absolute vast majority of the 1.6 billion Muslims on the face of the earth who feel that their religion has been hijacked by 100, 200, and nowadays with ISIS maybe about 20,000 or so. Having said that, in my view, and again, I have been there about 30 years in the United States. My 3 children are born there, and that's all they know. The U.S. remains, in my view, one of the best places to be in and live. The vast majority of American people are decent people. Now, I understand everywhere I go, they start telling me, but Doc, what about politics? Look, let me just answer that right off. People disagree about politics everywhere. At home in the U.S., you'll have different kinds of political currents and streams and opinions and all these things. And we can probably all agree that politics is not the most honest career. I'm not saying that, I'm just saying maybe to some extent. Whatever your view about politics, that's your view, and people agree and disagree. One thing is for a fact. The vast majority of American people are actually decent people. And they love to be, remember the U.S. was built on people fleeing Ireland and other places, the religious pilgrims, we call them, right? They were looking for freedom. So freedom remains a very precious American value. And that's something we need to understand. Remember that 9/11 was committed by, let's say, 19 people who belonged to the faith of Islam. But Islamophobia did not really rise after 9/11. Or 9/11. I call it 9/11 because it's an emergency in a sense. 9/11. You're still up, you're still there, you're working, you're living, and you have mosques are increasing everywhere, and the vast majority of people, of Americans of non-Muslim background, they're looking still for answers. I remember after 9/11, I was called so many times, and that's when I sort of started devoting more time to theology or to religion than what I was doing in medicine. And they asked me, why do these people do these things? Among the many things, churches were reaching out. Why do Muslims do these things? Or is that real Islam? Are they really Muslims? Do Muslims do this? Does the Quran condone violence? These were questions that were asked by ordinary Americans of different faith systems, and they're still asked today. People are confused. Many people obviously working with Muslims, they're their neighbors, etc., etc. So, in essence, I've been to Europe, I lived in Europe, I can tell you that the American society is much more tolerant and much more just. And all these things that are happening, you would think that there would be much higher backlash, but there isn't really. And American Muslims are still contributing positively. to society in general. I think they need to better articulate themselves. But again, remember, it's a country that's based on its capitalism, it's free enterprise. You can establish your own CNN if you can. And no one's going to hand you a free lunch in America, as you all know. No one's going to hand you a free microphone. You have to get your own, you have to do your own way. So I think, but the American Muslim community is still in its infancy in a sense. It's not that well established yet. I'm not saying it's not well established in a matter of organization, but the average American Muslims, they're amongst the highest educated, highest earning in the country. So that's also, I think the American Muslim community is probably the wealthiest and most educated Muslim community as far as a segment anywhere in the world. And Allah knows best. But anyway, what needs to happen is, obviously we have two congressmen who are Muslims as well, that are in the government as well. What I think, where the American Muslim community can move forward, I think, is better organization, journalists, media experts, managers, articulate that to the wider American community. I've always said in my teachings throughout the United States, it's no longer, we live in an age where it's no longer good enough to be good with the law of the land. And the vast majority of American Muslims are law-abiding citizens. But it's good because, obviously, being a minority, it's important that you're not just good with the law of the land, it's imperative that you're good with the people of the land. Not just the law of the land need to know that you're an abiding citizen, but your neighbors who may be Christians, Jews, agnostics, atheists, Hindus, Buddhists, whatever it is that they are, they need to also see your qualities as a human being who genuinely care for them. So, and what I say, mosques cannot be isolated spots of mysterious activities. They need to be a buzzing hubs of neighborhood activities. Doors cannot be closed for worship. Doors, minds, and hearts must be open for all. So, you leave no room for misunderstandings. The vast majority of American people, again, are truth-seeking people. Remember that. We just elected, not just, okay, but we've elected Barack Hussein Obama as the President of the United States. A man who comes, obviously he was born in the United States, but his father was Kenyan, his mother was American, biracial, looking African, with a Hussein as a middle name. And he was elected the President of the United States. What I'm trying to say, ladies and gentlemen, the American nation is a thinking nation with the capacity to change. And I think if we, looking at again at India, I see lots of similarities as well. India is a great civilization, great country, and everywhere I go to India, I've been only here, this is my second time, but I've been to many cities, and I've met many Indian Americans, and I meet them here as well. Great people, decent people, great history, civility, knowledge, tradition. My message always, look, Islam brought you the best, like the professor said, the best values: equality, justice, decency, charity, being good to those who are not good to you. Because if you're good to those who are good to you, then what good are you? But we can't just keep these things to ourselves. And the same thing I tell my fellow Americans who are Muslims, you need to reach out. You can't blame people you can't expect your average. I live in Georgia. Georgia is the Bible Belt, for those of you who know. Right? The South. It's the capital of the South. This is where the most focused Bible sort of society. You can't expect, Joe Smith, just for namesake, on the street to go and read up the Quran entirely and then read the whole Sunnah and come to you and say, you know what, I know, you're really a good man. You can't expect that. How many of you have read the Bible or the Old Testament and biblical studies? You would be, or here, Hindu literature and scriptures. All right? Few people do. What I'm saying is you can't expect the others to know what you know. You need to reach out, and that means you need to have your heart and mind open. And when people realize the beautiful values that Islam brings to them, it doesn't matter whether they believe in it or they don't. I think that we can all then contribute to a positive society, and we can contribute to a better nation, and obviously then positively contribute to humanity. After all, we may be different colors, different backgrounds, different ethnicities, different creeds, but at the end of the day, we are one people. The Prophet ﷺ tells us in the hadith that Al-Hakim narrated, كُلُّكُمْ لِآدَمْ وَآدَمُ مِنْ تُرَابٍ. All of you belong to Adam, or all of you are the children of Adam, and Adam is from clay. Thank you so much.